I cut him from the chest to the stomach and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. The government hasn't always been the most forthcoming entity. I think it's pretty safe to say they don't really tell us much at all.
The U.S. government knows something unexplained is out there.
There's no official number on how many human beings the United States and other governments have tested on. Per records, it said that hundreds of thousands were used as test subjects. Some of these tests and experiments involved intentional exposure of various things like hallucinogens, nerve agents, blister gases, and radiation. It was claimed that these tests were to support the development of weapons and protecting the health of military personnel against a variety of diseases and other combat situations. These tests were done on healthy adults, psychiatric patients, prison inmates, prisoners of war, and children. The goal was to develop biological weapons. It's estimated that 3,000 enemy soldiers and civilians were deliberately infected with all sorts of deadly pathogens. These people are used as human guinea pigs to create and breed dangerous diseases to monitor the effects on the human body. The Japanese Imperial Army did experiments in which they would drop plague bombs to see if they could start plague outbreaks. They discovered very quickly that they could. They were also known to dissect test subjects with no anesthesia. One former medical assistant in a Japanese army unit in China in World War II recollects what it was like to cut open someone, saying, "I cut him from the chest to the stomach and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound. He was screaming so horribly, but then he finally stopped. This was all in a day's work for the surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time." The reasoning behind this was since these men, women, and children were infected with plague for so long, they wanted to see what the disease did to the inside of the body. And it was felt that the anesthetic would have had a negative result, so it wasn't used. Takeo Wano, a 71-year-old former medical worker in the Unit 731, who now lives in a northern Japanese city of Moriyako, said he once saw a 6-foot-high glass jar in which a Western man was pickled in formaldehyde. The man had been cut into 2 pieces, vertically. Mr. Ueno guesses that he was Russian because there were so many Russians then living in the area. But that wasn't the only jar. The farmer says there were many jars: hands, feet, head, organs. They were all labeled American, French, but most were said to be Chinese or Korean. There's no evidence of any American remains being found at the compounds. However, there have been very well-known claims that there were in fact prisoners of war. It wasn't until 1984 that Japan admitted what it had denied at one time, that these things were true, and they were studying germ warfare. The Nazi Party were pretty heavy into human experimentation. They were also known to do human sacrifices from time to time. The main goal of the Holocaust was to remove all that were not of an Aryan race. The Nazi Party was determined to find a specific test to prove that they were the superior race. In this attempted discovery, many would die. Dr. Joseph Mengele, known as also the Angel of Death, conducted a lot of his tests on twins. He was fascinated by the thought of twins and often subjected them to blood tests, among other things. The examinations of the twins were super invasive and extensive, occasionally performing full blood transfusions between one twin to the other. In an attempt to fabricate blue eyes, painful eye drops were put into the twins' eyes, which would often cause blindness. They would infect one twin with disease while the other remained without it. When the infected twin died, they would kill the other to also examine them to see if they were connected in some way. If you were a twin, you were most definitely dead. the Nazis performed freezing and hypothermia experiments. They would send groups of men, women, and children into freezing and below freezing conditions. This study was set to determine how long it would take a body to succumb to hypothermia and to find an alternative way to revive those who had already been frozen. In an effort to make use of seawater, experiments were done on prisoners at the Dachau concentration camp. They would starve and dehydrate the prisoners for days and then inject them with salt water that had been processed. Those who received the salt water had severe diarrhea reactions, seizures, some hallucinated, went mad, and even died. Most died.